Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Libraries in Response. This is session 64, if you are counting, since March of 2020. We've been pretty lax these last, well, through the fall, really, maybe the summer too. Just a number of conflicting priorities, I suppose, and then maybe being a little bit lazy. So I apologize for that, but here we go. We're going to start a series off on low Earth orbit satellites, broadband from space. And so today we have a presentation from Dan York. I'll get to that in a second. We are the Gigabit Libraries Network, global consortium of libraries doing interesting things with technology, mostly around communications technology. We're hosted by our longtime partner, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, based in The Hague, with Stephen Weiber, the head of public policy, at the helm there. Thank you, Stephen. Our series sponsor, thank you very much, is the Internet Society, who has been sponsoring us here for the past year as well. And also we have media sponsorship by Broadband Breakfast, also very helpful. So this is a list of, we don't talk a lot about GLN, but these are the library and communications initiatives that we've done over the past few years, starting with Fiber the Library, which was a campaign that we thought valuable in 2007, still do, that every public library, all 17,000 facilities, should be connected with high-capacity fiber as a way to serve those communities as well as those facilities as priority endpoints. We helped co-found the Shelby Coalition, and then we got into different wireless projects. And you can see these are all reported and listed on our website, giglibraries.net. And the last one you see here is LEO Libraries, which is using low Earth orbit satellite connectivity to reach underserved libraries in the US and around the world, which we think there are quite a few of. There are 4,000 rural libraries in the US, and we don't have good data on their connectivity. It doesn't seem to exist. If anybody knows, please let me know. But just from the states that do keep this information, there must be at least 1,000 of those rural libraries that have less than the current FCC definition of broadband at 25 megabits. Wouldn't be surprised if the majority of those have less than 10 megabits. And we just think that's unacceptable. So we are advocating that. And Dan is with us today. I'll get back to Dan in a second. This is more about the series that we're going to run another session this month and then several sessions next month in January to look at the applications in education, health, public information, and e-gov services that are catchphrase for library services, among others, like access to the internet itself. Enhance community resilience against disasters and outages. We think this is a big one. And to close the digital divide, the global digital divide, which is somewhere around 3 billion people are yet to benefit or suffer, I guess you could include, from access to the internet. But we think everybody should have a choice at that. And then how does that fit in and impact the overall telecom infrastructure and ecosystem, all the terrestrial wired and wireless systems that this is perhaps impacting or fitting into or wrapping itself around. This is an outline of the sessions that we've got upcoming, so keep an eye out for that. A week from now, we'll have presentations from Starlink and Kuiper, the two of the LEO ISPs, I guess we would call them, with Starlink being the only one that's currently operating. And then into January, we're going to get into these application areas and then the wider world on how this is going on around outside. These are three rationales that we've kind of settled on, I suppose, for justifying an investment in trying this stuff out and evaluating it. One, there's, it's the best choice. There's just nothing out there. There are a lot of places that the only thing they have are geostationary satellite connectivity, which we'll hear more about, but this just seems unsatisfactory to nearly everyone that reports on it. Or maybe they have a little trickle of DSL somehow that's giving them maybe a megabit or 2 or 3 from some source. The second rationale is an interim solution. Okay, great. We've got tens of billions of dollars to connect people to fiber. This is wonderful. The US is getting serious about this stuff. But it takes time to get these out, to actually lay fiber or to build towers and extend access. So in the interim, we think this could be a very reasonable solution. And then even after the fiber comes, you've got this capability as a backup. We had just an example of that. One of our few projects happening in Montana, there's a fiber that connects the whole region, and it was cut. It's a common thing, backhoes across the fiber line, and suddenly everybody's out. Everybody, including Verizon and AT&T, everybody was out, except the one little library in Anaconda, Montana was up. They were live because, the dish just goes up and down. That's a really valuable thing when it's out. You don't think about it as much when it's not out, but when it is out, it's like number one. And then there's the role of libraries as responders. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We will, because we think this is a huge thing that's going on that libraries can play a major role in. Just pick your disaster. It's happening everywhere: fires, floods, storms, droughts. The climate is getting insistent on our attention. And these billion-dollar events are increasing with each passing year, or the trend anyway. They don't not increase so far every single year, but generally up. So this is a big deal, and we're very interested in how libraries will play a role in this. So this is a great little illustration of mitigation adaptation. Mitigation, we absolutely have to, but it's late. It's actually too late to stop the effects as we're seeing today. So we have to adapt. And so do you have an adaptation strategy? Does your community have a strategy? There's a lot that libraries can do in that, from the public education to the buildings being showcases of sustainable technologies and so on. Here we have a couple of quotes from people that are using these systems that have very positive experiences with it. And will it hold up? There are a lot of questions. We're excited about the prospects of this technology, but we're not sanguine enough to think that it's a proven done deal. Will it hold up? Can it sustain the level of performance that it shows in the early going when there are enough people signed on to it to pay for it? Is it actually sustainable? It looks like it's really easy to set up as kind of really plug and play technology. I've had firsthand experience with that in a rural environment. You just plug it in, it turns itself on, and you're live in no time. And that's amazing compared to all other communications technologies. So enough of me and enough of that, but welcome again, and welcome Dan York, the Director of Online Content for the Internet Society. He has overseen a year-long study that is linked. You saw it on the registration site and on the invitations. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. In any case, Dan is going to take us through it and what he has found and what he thinks this all means. So Dan, welcome back, and take it away.
Right. Sounds good. If you could enable screen sharing, I'll put up some slides. We can get talking about some of the pieces that are here. So thank you, everybody, for joining into the session. If you've come to past sessions, I've been here speaking a little bit before about the work that we were doing that was in progress. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what we found over the scope of this year and the pieces around that. So let me begin with a bit of okay, I can just hear.
You got it.
So as Don mentioned, I am a project lead for projects at the Internet Society. And if you're not familiar with the Internet Society, we've been around for a bit over 30 years, focusing on how do we really build an open and globally connected, secure, trustworthy internet for everyone. You know, one of our key phrases, as we say at the internet, is for everyone. And we want to provide that access or help people get on there. And this has been one of the questions we've had for decades, really, is how do we connect the unconnected? And if you're familiar with our work, we do a lot of work with helping people with community networks, with different forms of access, making sure that they can get there, get online in some forms. There's around 2 billion people estimated from the ITU recently. About a third of the world is still not fully connected, but even beyond that, people who are connected may not have really great connections. I live in a part of northern Vermont where I live in a suburb. I have excellent connectivity from a cable provider right at my house. I have actually terrible mobile connectivity. I can't even get maybe 1 bar of connectivity if I here at my house. I have terrible connectivity. Some people about 10 minutes away from me don't have any options. Or if they do, it might be a traditional satellite provider or something like that, which can give them access, but not really kind of strong connectivity for the kinds of things we want to do today. So in all of this, we started a project back at the beginning of 2022 to look at, you know, what role could low Earth orbit or LEOs or LEOs, however you want to say it, you know, what are these kind of satellites? How do they work? How can they work? We've certainly seen in media any amount of attention paid to all of these different systems. SpaceX's Starlink, of course, has had a huge amount of attention, particularly with Ukraine, with the devastation of the infrastructure and the whole space there. But using Starlink to bring it back, we've seen lots of other different kinds of connections and stories around this. But the question we've had from the beginning was sort of, okay, these systems provide access, but how good is that access? What can it do? Where are the spaces that it can work at? Is it good for the overall internet, or is it just kind of, yeah, maybe a niche case? What are the spaces? The reality is, after a year of working on this, I can say that we actually don't know the answers to all those questions, but we have some ideas. One question we get is, why is this interest, right? We've had some talk about LEOs going back even to the 1990s when there was some initial interest and focus around this. And, you know, we've had satellite internet access for several decades, right? Coming from what are called geosynchronous or geostationary satellites that are out at about 36,000 kilometers away from the Earth. They have the property that, because they're at the place they do, they orbit over roughly the same spot of the Earth. And so you can just put an antenna pointed at the satellite and you can get some kind of connection that's there. And from a satellite provider's point of view, you don't need that many satellites, maybe 3, and you can encompass the entire planet around the equator anyway, and be able to go and get that. But traditional access, as the slide talks about, you know, you get connectivity, but you don't, you know, it's often long latency. It takes a long time to get all the way out to 36,000 kilometers and get back, typically maybe around 600 milliseconds or more. You can't do a Zoom call over that kind of connection. You can't be involved in gaming, or, you know, be in Fortnite or Roblox or whatever kind of immersive virtual world people might want to be in doing things like that. You're not going to be able to participate in some of the esports or virtual worlds or metaverse kind of things, all these different ambitions people have in different ways. That doesn't work well over a traditional satellite connection. But it does work well over LEOs, over low Earth orbit satellites. They do provide this low latency, high speed connection. Now, to be fair, it's not necessarily going to be as fast as what you can get from a wired fiber connection. You know, when we talk about latency, the lag, the amount of time a packet takes to go back and forth, you know, I just mentioned the geostationary satellites, it might take about 600 milliseconds to get out there and back. In a LEO environment, it might be 40 to 50 milliseconds. Works fine for a lot of this. On a fiber connection, it could be 5 to 10 milliseconds. So you can have a much faster connection that's there. And And in a world in which we are creating a lot of content, streaming a lot of stuff from our homes, fiber connections also can provide a stronger upload, a more symmetrical experience where you can have a much more of an upload speed difference there. But if you can't get fiber, LEOs are one of those solutions that provide you with something that can get that high-speed connection. You'll note on the slide, I also have an acronym MEO, which is medium Earth orbit. And that's kind of shown in this picture. If you look at this, this is a picture that's there that shows way out on the right side is the geosynchronous orbit, or GEO. It's about 36 kilometers, 36,000 kilometers it's out there. That's where the geostationary satellites are. Way back next to the Earth is that small zone called low Earth orbit, which is under 2,000 kilometers. And then the middle Earth orbit, or MEO, is in between that. And MEO has some of our navigation satellites, like the GPS systems, some of those that are out there. There are also players who offer internet connectivity from that space. There's a company called SES, which operates a network of satellites that are there today called O3B. And they provide internet access from that middle zone in there, that medium space. And they can have fewer satellites, but they're in between. They can often have like a 100 millisecond kind of latency or something or thing. So you get to the edge of what you can do with modern kind of space. But LEOs are all down in this low Earth orbit area, which is also where we have things like the International Space Station, China's space station, all of our different communication satellites, or a lot of different pieces are all down in there. There's a lot going on. In fact, here's one visualization of it that you can see, which has a lot of different satellites. And this is just even today without even the larger networks. So this talks to a difference of LEOs from geo satellites and others, is that because they're so close to the Earth, they're rotating around. And so you need to go and create a whole, what we call a constellation of satellites around that are there. So there's many satellites. Instead of like 3 or 4 or 5, there's thousands. Starlink currently has about 3,500 satellites. SpaceX has about 3,500 Starlink satellites up there. OneWeb has about 400 on their path to getting 600. And Starlink, their current constellation, is going to go to about 4,400 satellites. They've got another one proposed, which will be about almost 30,000 satellites. Amazon's Project Kuiper, which Don referenced, is planning to launch next year, and it's going to bring in about 15,000 satellites, over the scope of a various number of years. So a lot of activity, a lot of things, and what's driving this in many ways is several different things that have happened. We have advances in rocket technology. If you've paid attention to what SpaceX is doing, they're reusing rockets. That was not something that you could do before, but they're launching rockets up there with 50 satellites, and the main rocket that launches is coming back and landing, back on the planet on one of their recovery ships, et cetera. And they're able to go and launch it again. You're getting economies of scale, which you just couldn't get in the past. You're also looking at mass production of satellites. When you look at a geo satellite, typically they're the size of like a bus. They might take, many months to years to create. They're typically custom, bespoke. They're created, they're customized, all of that. They go through immense amounts of testing. They do that, and they're all that, and then they're launched on big rockets that boost them all the way out to 36,000 kilometers. It's a long process. The LEO satellites, they're smaller. They're maybe the size of a car in some form. And there are mass production lines. You can see SpaceX has its mass production facility. Amazon's building a mass production facility where they just stamp out these satellites. They can just, it's literally assembly line. They just go and they pump these things out. They can produce them, which is good because they have to keep launching them to get this constellation going. And then you've seen also companies like SpaceX, which do both satellite and launch services all together. So the economy is very different from the 1990s when we first saw this launch in there. We've seen lots of different, examples. Don referenced a number of them already. We've seen, the typical use case, right, is somebody who is remote. They don't have many options for access. They're able to use a Starlink satellite to be able to go, Starlink antenna to be able to go and connect out and get the kind of connectivity, which for many people can be life-changing. They can be able to actually participate in the online world. Their kids can go to school instead of having to drive down to maybe the library to get Wi-Fi access to be able to do their homework. They're able to go and be able to participate in the online world and in the internet. Here we're talking about libraries, and in this webinar series that Don has referenced, we've had some great case studies in the past around how this kind of connectivity has helped, just change lives for people in some of the communities who have had this kind of connection in there. We also, at the Internet Society, do a good bit of work with community networks where people are taking upon themselves to build internet options, to create internet access. And one of the challenges that you typically have with community networks is how do you get adequate, what's called backhaul in the industry, connection back to the rest of the internet? How do you get that connectivity to the community network? Often it's, fiber or having to figure out a wireless connection or something. Satellites, LEO satellites in particular, provide this kind of option, this kind of connectivity. Disasters, we talk about this in different ways. I'm part of another great volunteer organization called the ITDRC, the IT Disaster Resource Center. And actually, Don's had Joe Gillis on here at the past talking about different things. They were just active here in the United States with Hurricane Ian down in Florida. And a large part of what they were able to do was to be able to bring connectivity back. Starlink makes it super easy because they can bring one of their trailers into a location, put up a Starlink antenna on the top, connect out, bring that connectivity down, and then they can share it locally with Wi-Fi access points or cellular access points so people can be able to get that kind of connectivity. First responders, but also people in that local community. Similarly, they've done work out in California with wildfires, where you basically just have somebody in a pickup truck can go and a pickup truck and some gear can come into an area, pop up their Starlink dish, get this kind of connectivity and provide internet access to the people right in that area very quickly and easily and very movable. It's the last bullet here mentions airplanes, ships, mobile users, RVs, people doing whatever. There's a great variety of different things that are coming in here. Just briefly, so we're thinking on terminology wise, I talked about the three different components that we need to make these systems work. Is the constellation, of course, we've already talked about that. Typically, the vendors talk about this in terms of shells. You have a certain shell of satellites that operate at a certain altitude and orbit and those kind of things. And some of the LEO constellations are in different shells, different levels, different kinds of things. It can get a little complex inside of there. Then you have a device which in the satellite industry is called a user terminal or a ground terminal. In our kind of regular language, we're going to call it an antenna. Right? It's an antenna and some other stuff that goes along with it. But it's different from the traditional antennas. If you had like a dish TV or something that was for TV access or whatever, you typically have a rounded antenna that you put on the side of your house and you point it up at a geo satellite or something like that. And that's what it looks like. The LEO antennas look a lot more like pizza boxes or something like that. They're typically flat, and inside of it is where the magic happens because they've got electronically steerable antennas that go and are able to coordinate with multiple satellites. Because unlike a GEO, where you just have one satellite, you point the dish and you're done, LEO systems have to be tracking these satellites and being able to go and connect to them and work with it. And so that's the user terminal, antenna, whatever you want to call it, that you're using as a subscriber. Sometimes those vendors will package with it a Wi-Fi access point or other pieces, to go and work with it. And it's different options around that, but that's what it's called there. And then the other important part is you have to have a connection back to the rest of the internet. And that's provided through a ground station. And these typically have large antennas. In the case of Starlink, it's typically an array of about 9 antennas or so. And there's different ways, again, that it will work per vendor, but it looks in different ways. Here's a picture of what the situation would look like. Is if I'm on the left side, I have my Starlink dish in this case, and I'm connecting into this call even. My packets may go they go to one satellite, they come down to a ground station, they connect out to the rest of the internet. Now, the interesting part, of course, is with the satellites moving so quickly, et cetera, you may wind up getting where your initial packet being part of this will come back off of a different satellite. So this is, again, where the antennas and stuff make this all work. So from your perspective, you're just connecting to the internet. It's out there, it's there. One question, and one of the interesting aspects here is that, well, what if you're not in range of a ground station? What if you're in far northern Canada or northern Alaska, or you're down in Antarctica or somewhere like that, or you're in the middle of the jungle in Brazil or somewhere where you don't have a ground station near you? One of the interesting evolutions of this is that these constellations are working with what are called intersatellite lasers. This is where we get to talk about lasers in space. And it's not lasers like Star Wars or something like that, but they are sending signals between each other so that you can be able to connect from an antenna up to a satellite, across multiple satellites, and then down to one that has a ground station. Now, there's a lot of questions as, how much capacity can you do this? How many people could really be on this kind of connection? What's all this? There's a lot of unknowns around here, but this is the kind of thing, the evolution that happens here. Now, to make this happen in a country and to understand where this is, and I realize a lot of our audience is from North America, but I know there are people from other parts of the world. For this to happen in a given country, the three different parts need to be approved by appropriate regulators. The constellation is launched, it's up there, but in order for it to operate in a country, it needs to be turned on. You need to be able to approve the access in the spectrum that's there. And so SpaceX, Amazon, OneWeb, Telesat, all these companies have people who are going around to the regulators of every single country asking if they can be approved to operate in that area. And what's interesting is in some countries they can't. I was recently speaking to the Armenian Internet Governance Forum on a panel, or speaking remotely, and one of the other panelists was from the regulator in their country, and he indicated that there was actually no way they can turn on Starlink now if they wanted to, or probably any of the other LEO situations, because for historical reasons, their military and their national security entities are actually using the same frequencies that are needed by SpaceX and Amazon and others to communicate between the satellite and the antenna and stuff on that line. So they actually can't actually use it until they figure out how to share the spectrum. It is a shared area, so you can't have multiple pieces in there, but how they can share it well, or how they can move their systems to another frequencies range. So it's not necessarily that just because the satellites are overhead, they can be used within a given country. There are issues around there. That whole user terminal that I mentioned, the antenna, that needs approvals in a country to be able to operate, all of those kinds of things. And then there needs to be access to a ground station. Now, not every country may necessarily have to have a ground station. They need to be within 1,000 miles of or 1,000 kilometers of the satellite or something, but there will need to be arrangements for it. So these are the kind of steps that need to happen. Now, if you're here in the United States, as I know many of our listeners are, all of this has happened. All right, and in Canada and other parts of Europe and other places. But this is why sometimes you're like, well, why isn't it available in country X? Because it needs to go through the steps. So I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the things, the challenges we saw in pieces, but I'll mention that if you're interested in reading more about this, we have a document. It's at internetsociety.org/LEOs. You can just go there and you can download this document. It's about a 15-page document, and it talks about what are the opportunities, what are the pieces, but also what are the challenges and what are the questions that we all need to be asking as we go through this. I'm going to touch on a couple of those, although let me just see, I see there are some questions. Let me just look at these quickly. Ground stations on, so there are companies that are working with Starlink, yes, on getting on that backhaul to a tower. So you would have you'd have a user terminal basically on that wireless tower to be able to go and connect up, either as a primary connection or as a resilient connection for additional kind of backup and stuff on that line. So there's a number of different companies that are doing that kind of thing. There was an initiative that SpaceX did to go and connect up I think around 10,000 schools all across Brazil, where they were looking to provide this kind of connectivity back for a whole region. There's other libraries, other places that are there. So if you have more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But let me talk about some of the challenges we've looked at and some of the pieces that are there that I think we need to look at as society, but also as people involved in this, as consumers. The number one is that people get to is affordability. You know, can people actually go and afford to use these systems? Here in the United States, the systems have been around $600 for the initial installation, and then around $110 a month for the ongoing subscription. Now, SpaceX has kind of responded to market pressure, and they've changed to different subscription levels. So you can get some different, you can get a best effort level, you can get a number of different ways that you can have subscription to do it. They've also adjusted their pricing in other parts of the world. Initially, they were trying to have kind of one price globally, and that they found that didn't work, you know, and so they wound up looking at how, you know, in France, it might be half the price of what you could get here in the United States. In other parts of the world, it will be at different levels. But that pricing still may be outside the realm of what people can afford. So what kind of systems are there? What kind of subsidies are out there? What kind of ways can we do this? Here in the United States, I saw a school district, I want to say it was in Virginia, I need to find the resource, that mentioned that they were funding through some of the COVID relief funds, et cetera. They were funding subscriptions for students for a certain number to get the initial dish, the antenna and piece, and then a 2-year subscription to it. What other models will we see like that, where people may provide this kind of connectivity? A second question, of course, is around capacity. You know, these systems are going up. When people first get on, they might get tremendous, you know, capability. They might get 200, 300 megabits per second down, some kind of connections like that. But we've certainly seen reports, often anecdotal, about different kinds of levels of less capacity. Ookla, a company that does the speedtest.net, they did a study earlier this year that came out that showed that Starlink's capacity had decreased. Their speeds had decreased in a number of different countries, although they were still faster than many others and certainly faster than the geos, but they had decreased in some areas. There's been complaints in online forums, but one of the questions we don't know, because we need more research, is how much of that is growing pains. You know, is they've sold a lot into a certain area and there aren't as many satellites. How much of that is growing pains while Starlink continues to build out the rest of its constellation, versus how much of it might be inherent limitations within the systems? We don't know. Not sure about visibility within the, you know, to know all of those kinds of things. I think we probably won't know until more of these systems get up and are launched. If you look at what Starlink is doing, by the time they get to their Gen 2 constellation with 30,000 satellites, they're going to have a lot of capacity going across there. So these are also planned to be bigger satellites with more processing, more kinds of things in that line. So we'll have to see. But one of our pleas for the operators is to say, can we get access? Can we help understand what's the capacity limitation on this? Because on one level, we don't want to be all investing a lot of time, energy, and money into deploying these systems or getting used to these systems and then finding that they won't really support all of the different things that we want to have. Some other concerns on the policy side, there are certainly spectrum allocation issues. Here in the United States, we're seeing some questions around, you know, the spectrum that the satellites need is also desired by some of the mobile telecom companies to use for some of their 5G systems and stuff on that line. So there's battles around who gets to have that kind of spectrum. There's issues around allocation of orbits, around just, you know, and questions within the providers around, you know, who can interfere with mine or not, or all these things. There's a lot of questions in there that we still just have to understand as we go through this. There's also some questions around, you know, the security and privacy of these systems. Right at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was an incident where there was an attack on, it was a geo provider, it was on their network, that wound up shutting down, you know, in the industry you might say bricking, but they were shutting down the user terminals of a large number of satellite customers across Ukraine and that kind of area. It was there was a deliberate attack that was made against this satellite provider system that shut down all those user terminals. So, we don't necessarily know the security, et cetera, of the modem that we might get from our ISP. But, we know it's there. We know there's a lot of them. There are security concerns at times. Same kind of security concerns with things like user terminals and pieces like that. What's the privacy? There was a study out on the Asia Pacific Network Information Center, APNIC, recently just had a blog post from some folks who did an academic study around the capacity of Starlink systems and the privacy. And they were saying that they detected, there were no middle boxes. There was nothing in the way. From all of they could see, it was just a plain internet connection with no kind of, no extra privacy concerns, which is great. That's the kind of research we want to see. We want to, be sure that we can get an open pipe like that. So, those are some real concerns we have. Interoperability. One of our concerns is, if you look at this, we're going to be building all of these separate meshes of these constellations up there. Are they all going to be completely separate? Will they each just have their own data, or could data flow from one to the other, subject to routing costs or things like that? I've been thinking about it in terms of how we built out wireless networks in the United States versus other parts of the world. Here in the United States, we built out 4 separate physical antenna infrastructures. We had Verizon CDMA, we had AT&T, we had Sprint, we had Nextel. Each of them built out completely separate antennas and systems. You had separate phones, you had all of that. And so it was completely separate architectures. If you look at the rest of the world, though, they all standardized, in most all of the rest of the world, standardized on GSM, on a standard frequency, standard thing. Different people put up different infrastructures of towers and stuff, but your phone could be able to roam from one to the other. Your packets could go across that. One of our questions is, how's the space-based internet going to go? Is it going to have, completely separate architectures that are all just up there doing their own thing? And it may be that way. Or will there be some way that there can be interoperation so that we have even more capacity by being able to share across the different systems that are up there? We don't know. The last bullet item is a big item here for people too: space debris, right? We are going to have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these satellites going up here. They only have about a 5-year lifespan. Part of it is they're in a low orbit, right? They need some propellant to keep them up there, because otherwise they just naturally fall into the atmosphere and burn up. At some point they run out of propellant. At some point they do that. Now, this is an area that is highly it's regulated, but it's also just a lot of attention being focused on it. And there's a lot of people, all of the operators, whether it's SpaceX, OneWeb, Amazon, whoever, they're paying a lot of attention to this. I mean, it's in their own self-interest, right? If somebody's satellite breaks up into pieces or something, it can damage all the other satellites that are up there. There's a lot of attention to this, but it is a really strong issue that we have to be thinking about, because we don't, we have to be paying attention, because we're launching more of these all the time. Again, hundreds and thousands at any point in time. Some of the other final things I'll mention: we don't know. One of the things we came out of this research this year was to really understand that as much as we have all of the marketing and the promotion and everything else, this is a new industry. And, as Don mentioned in the beginning, really there's only one operator, SpaceX, with their Starlink, that is widely available. They do direct to consumer. Now, OneWeb is also up there. It is doing commercial services. It is a slightly different model. It works through resellers and some other folks like that. It is out there in some limited availability. There's about 16 other constellations that have filed for launching over the next couple of years. We mentioned Amazon Project Kuiper. There's Telesat out of Canada. There's a couple out of China. There's another one out of, there's even one out of Rwanda. There's all sorts of different filings that are up there. We don't know how many of those are actually going to turn into reality. We don't know how their business models may be. Kuiper has talked again about being direct to consumer. So they're looking at doing kind of the same kind of thing that what SpaceX is doing. Others are looking at resellers, looking at those. And that's just actually the internet access ones. There's about probably another 20 or so that are looking at Internet of Things, at sensor networks, at mobile networks. it's a crowded space up there. Will all of these be sustainable? Will they all work? I don't know. None of us know. It's going to be a very interesting couple of years. We also don't know the overall environmental impact of what's going on here. Just as we were putting this paper to be published in November, the United States General Accounting Office, GAO, issued a report to the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, which is our regulator of spectrum and therefore satellites, et cetera, here, and said basically, look, you all need to be paying much more attention to environmental issues. You haven't been in the way that it's worked for large scale constellations. You need to. And the FCC came back under its current leadership and said, you're right, we do. So we don't know what that means in terms of both, launch cycles, et cetera, but also we hope out of that we'll get a better understanding. We're launching all of these, thousands of satellites. I don't know that anybody fully understands the impact of having thousands of satellites burn up in our upper atmosphere every year as they start to deorbit and stuff. We don't know. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's not. We don't know. These are questions that we do need to be thinking about and doing that. I mentioned here astronomy too. There's been a lot of concern, and SpaceX, to its credit, has been very attentive to this to try to look at how do you minimize the impact of the satellites on astronomy. We rely on astronomical observations, even for weather, for meteorology issues, for all sorts of different things, and just for pieces out there. They've looked at a number of ways, they're engaged in that, but it is something that we need to be thinking about. I'm going to wrap there because I'd like to get to some questions and see what else people have. But I would again encourage you, if you can, go to our internetsociety.org/LEOs. You can see the paper is there. There's a little bit on the main page about kind of the main parts of it, but the document itself has a lot more information in it. And I would ask you, please read the document, share it with other people. These are the questions we need to be asking over these next couple of years as these systems come online. I would also encourage you to critique us as well. If you see things in there that you think are wrong, or you think we're not being accurate, let me know, let us know, let the internet side know. We'd love to be able to engage in that dialogue and to work with that. And my contact information, I'm just York at ISOC at isoc.org. You're welcome to send me some information with that. But I see we have a bunch of questions, so I would love to throw it out and see what we are seeing in here.
That's great, Dan. This is especially impressive to me because, as you pointed out, a lot of things are changing, and trying to summarize an emerging ecosystem or infrastructure that's moving so quickly. Like you say, you're ready to go to press, and then to go, oh, what about this? What about that?
Oh, it's crazy. We were trying to get this paper done back in like June and July, but then, like weekly, we'd be like, oh, hey, we originally said something about it would be great if LEO systems were not restricted to a specific physical location, because back at the beginning of 2022, they were. You could only sign up for Starlink from your specific residence, and that was it. Well, no sooner had we done something like that than they'd rolled out like Starlink for RVs, which was where you could put it on a recreational vehicle, a camper or something like that, or be able to use it. And we're like, that's cool, but it would be really great if you could use it on a vehicle that was in motion, not just there. And then, a couple of weeks later, they roll out, well, now you can use it in motion with different antennas. So it was always kind of like, it's at some point we were just like, okay, we just got to cut it here. We're going to send it out there, get it out there, ask the questions. But we are planning, the Internet Society will continue to monitor this space. We will continue to be engaged in this. We'll continue to do presentations like this one. We're sponsoring this series that you have here. And we will look that, a year from now, not a year from now, but several months from now, 9 months from now or so, we'll look at revising this paper and see what's changed in time since. So you can expect that we'll probably have a version 2 of this sometime next year, which will probably answer many of these questions, or at least perhaps have more questions. Who knows?
Right. More questions all the time, and they're coming in.
Yeah.
And we're picking up on that, Dan. As we have discussed, this series is intended to dive more deeply into many of these issues that you brought up. Have use cases come on, people with their direct experience, and also speculate about what this all means, which we don't know. I just want to try to, from my perspective, say that this is this is an emerging technology, but this is not an experimental technology. It works to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
And mentioned a lot of the questions that are open there, is it sustainable and so forth. So the rationale, we think, should be cautious optimism and to learn about these issues firsthand. It doesn't take that much. It's not like, well, does fiber really work? I don't know. Let's run a fiber line 10 miles out to the farm and see if it works. No, this is something you get one of these pizza boxes and you set it up, and then you decide, okay, this works. No, this doesn't really work for us. It's not that complicated. And also a number of these questions can be addressed next week when we have actual providers on, like Starlink and Kuiper. They'll be able to address some of these things directly. So if we don't get to it today, please come back next week and address it directly to the providers. So we do have some questions, though.
I see some questions, and I see Judith asked about, she'd like to learn more about the project in Brazil. There was some press, there was a whole bunch of press actually around what was going on there. Elon Musk went down to Brazil himself and was there for the rollout of some of that. I can probably send you some on that, but if you search on that for Starlink in Brazil schools, there's a digital schools initiative or something like that. They did a lot of work in that kind of space there. Don, I'm seeing questions on E-rate, and I admit I don't fully know the status.
All right,
of that
it's
right
okay.
Now.
Well, this is a big question for anchor institutions, especially libraries and schools.
Yep.
E-rate is a federal program, federal subsidy program that provides discounts on connectivity to the facilities and different category for connectivity inside of the facility, Wi-Fi networks essentially. It's a big program. It's a $4 billion a year subsidy program, and schools and libraries take advantage of it. Schools especially, but it requires that providers become certified providers under E-rate, and Starlink, or SpaceX, I guess, is the actual operating corporation, was in line to do that because it was required under the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, RDOF,
right,
that they become an E-rate provider. But then the FCC rescinded that subsidy to Starlink because they projected that Starlink would not be able to perform to the level that they were required to, though that actual date hasn't come yet. We thought it was a little premature, but that's what they did. So Starlink is no longer required to do that, and maybe they become a little bit disincentivized because of that. We might put that to them next week. So
I was about to say, it sounds like a perfect question for next week.
Right. They've had it before, so they're practiced at the answer.
And I see a hand we have here, but let me just, Alexander asking there, when's Starlink going to be launched in Sudan? To be clear, we're not associated with SpaceX. That you could also ask to them next week in there, but I think it will go back to those questions that I said is, can there be government approvals of Starlink to work on those frequencies? Can they get the equipment authorized? And is there a ground station within range that can be licensed, et cetera, for the connectivity? So those are the three things that need to happen in Sudan for Starlink or any of the other systems to be able to go and do it. And I know that SpaceX has people specifically looking to open up countries in this way. Amazon does. They have dedicated staff who are going around talking to governments to try to work with that. But that's the three pieces.
Right.
And as to that timing, you need to talk to them next week or on their website. I don't know what they say. They have a nice map there.
Right. They post the countries where they have received permission.
Yeah.
Starlink. So you can, Wikipedia is a place to see where these are currently approved. It doesn't mean they're available because they have to, Dan said, set up actual services. There has to be a ground station to service the satellites and the user terminals in each location, and they're not necessarily the same thing. I want to go to Bob Boker here because he probably is responding to the E-rate remarks that I probably misrepresented. Bob, can you unmute? And
Sure, Don. No, I think your comment was correct. I had noted in the chat from a technology perspective, the E-rate program for the most part is technology neutral in the underlying form of whatever the technology is to make that connectivity to the individual schools and libraries. And from a satellite perspective, for example, HughesNet is an E-rate eligible service, and there's no issue there. And there certainly wouldn't be either with the LEO systems that are either out there now or being developed. But you're also right, Don, in that these providers do have to register, if you will, with the FCC as an E-rate eligible service. But again, it's not that there's a question about the technology at all. It's more a matter of the providers stepping up to the plate and doing that registration. And from the RDOF perspective, you're right, for better or for worse, Starlink was denied funding, I think, back in August or September. But as I understand it, I think they've appealed that. But at the same time, they don't have to be an RDOF recipient to provide E-rate eligible services. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of ISPs and telephone companies out there providing internet service to our schools and libraries that get no RDOF funds.
Right, exactly so. The other point about that, about E-rate, is that for recipients of the discount, schools and libraries, they are required to filter their connections. And they also, there is an application burden, I guess, an administrative burden to actually file for this. So what we've seen is that libraries, especially rural libraries, disproportionately lack the benefit under the E-rate program, either because they're required to filter, which a lot of libraries just don't believe in filtering, or the administrative application overhead is too much of a bother. So it's a battle on that. What else have we got here? You see any other questions, Dan, that appeals?
Yeah, I see one question that was here. I just moved around about from Stephen Abram about white space was a thing a few years ago. Is this a way to create more bandwidth? So white space is basically it's some of the unused frequencies or the radio frequencies typically that well, in the United States anyway, a lot of it was talking about a TV white space, about some of the frequencies that were not used for broadcasting. In those cases, and can they be reused for other purposes and for connectivity and forms? And there have been different approaches, different techniques, different things to do to provide that kind of connectivity. I think some of those are out there. I know there are people working with those kind of systems in different spaces. And the question they asked was, is this a way to create more bandwidth for nonprofits? And I guess maybe I'm not sure if you were asking. If you want to unmute and ask the question, whether you're asking about it was the white space or for LEOs.
I think Stephen is getting at whether it's a dedicated application.
Here, he unmuted. So
I was basically thinking that it's an opportunity to use a slightly less competitive space to create. I know it runs the risk of not having internet agnosticism, but it might have an opportunity to regulatorily, maybe internationally, create a space for a tier that deals with those needier organizations, countries, to actually use the space. And maybe it's got a bit of a governor on the engine, but it's a way to bridge.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the satellite frequencies themselves are, we could have a whole discussion on those. They're all, I mean, it's all done through the International Telecommunications Union. There's a whole, actually coming up this year, there'll be the World Radio, next year, in the World Radio Congress 2023, where these kind of issues all around spectrum allocation, spectrum, and who gets what spectrum are discussed at insane length, right, around how this all works. There are specific bands that the satellites are allocated for use, because there's two actual ranges. There's the user terminal to satellite and the satellite to ground station. Those are two different spectrum ranges that are, in theory, by the ITU, designated for these kind of things. Now, whether every government decides to play along with the ITU ranges is one of those open questions. And that was what came up in the case of Armenia, was the discussion was, well, why can't we use those? And it's because they've done this following some Russian models around how to do different spectrum allocation. And so they're a little bit stuck right now in their particular case. But there are specific allocations there. I don't know. I mean, the white space issue could be something that might help on the, I think more on the ground side, perhaps on the communication, thinking in the community network kind of space or something. But it's a good question. I don't have the answer to you on that one.
I think what I worry about, and this is something we don't talk about enough, is the spectrum auctions run to tens of billions of dollars.
Oh, totally.
So this is a gold rush right now.
Yep.
That is attracting a lot of for-profit energy, and I'd like to see initiatives to, and maybe this is an Internet Society advocacy role, to put some more balance back into the spectrum allocations, because it's like we see people going after green belts for real estate. This is the bandwidth real estate that exists in the sky.
Yep.
It's an international ownership, and when tens of billions of dollars are involved for a single narrow point of contact in a spectrum allocation, we are crying in the wind against some of the powers that be. Anyway, I'll stop talking about it, but I think it's worth bringing up.
It is, and actually we had that conversation. We were asking that because those satellite ranges are a shared spectrum, right? It is shared between all of the providers, have to share it, as well as sometimes other entities and other places. So it is a shared area in that space. And yeah, I agree with you. We definitely believe that there needs to be certainly equity in spectrum allocation in different forms and different ways. So I hear you. It is certainly something that we need to be looking at in a stronger way. Judith, I see you have a hand.
Yes, my question was on the initiatives that, like, when, as Stephen was talking about, when start with the schools, the libraries, installing partnering with nonprofits. Are they like donating the terminals? Are they donating some licenses? Is it like a foundation? Like normally some of them partnered with others. Like all the ISPs have foundations that do some of these work. I mean, what are they, what is there something like that with Starlink, or are they using grant money to just buy the terminals? And then what's the sustainability of this issue? So that's my question.
So I think, again, so first of all, I can't speak for SpaceX or Amazon or OneWeb or any of the folks who are doing that. And again, I think a lot of it is, this is still a young emerging industry, and they're doing stuff in a wide variety of ways. And Amazon can't do any of this yet because they need to get their satellites up in space. And OneWeb needs to finish up its constellation. They had a bit of a bump because they were using Soyuz rockets to launch a lot of their systems, and that kind of stopped at the beginning of this year. They just recently actually launched another tranche of their satellites using a provider out of India, another launch provider there. So they're ramping up to get to where they can provide capacity and all of those. And I don't know, it's a good question again for SpaceX for next week around what exact models they may use to provide those. I think in some cases we've seen subsidies from local governments to do this. I don't know how much SpaceX has actually donated or pieces like that. So I don't have a specific answer. I would say come back next week and talk to the folks then.
It's a good one. They have done some donations here and there. It hasn't been a constant like their pricing tiers. It's all evolving, and so they have different ways of helping, or they have a lot of priorities. It's a really complicated thing. The business, the technology, the markets. Looks like we're frozen here.
No, I hear you.
We hear you.
Yep.
Okay. So the point is, I think that this needs a lot of attention. It it's clearly groundbreaking technology. It could be game-changing technology. That remains to be seen. And we would like for libraries and other anchor institutions, the public services side of this market, to pay special attention to this. And whether or not that means that they get special compensations because the services rely on the public airwaves in the first place, or whether they're just another market segment that has to compete on price for the services. But we think, you know, the libraries are a really good place to monitor the technology and the performance of the providers and report out. And so the only other thing I want to add to that, and we should close, and we'll give Dan a last remark here, is that we think the role of the state library agencies in the U.S. or the national libraries around the world are ideally situated and suited to oversee these explorations, to support these are invariably local installations on how this performs and how it works against the needs of a different community. We had a lot of state library agencies sign up for the session today, and we encourage them to consider supporting projects in their state as statewide projects and develop a policy around this technology, you know, an interim policy, a long-range policy, whatever derives from that. So Dan, we're over, but we started late, but we're gonna come to you for a closing remark, and then we will come back again next week and pick this up again.
Sounds great. So I just wanted to say, to also point you to a chat where Alexandra Petrescu wrote something good about the white space question. And it really is, you know, these spectrum issues we could have a whole conversation around because they are so complicated. It is billions of dollars to try to get those. You know, part of what we talk about in our recommendations around here was really, you know, how can we all advocate for the fair use of spectrum? You know, how do we have it allocated clearly, shared fairly across all operators, all different technologies in different ways? How can we ensure that happens? I think I guess I would say that my final point would be, this is a brand new industry. It's coming out, you know, this last couple of years, we're seeing this launch, we're seeing the success that SpaceX is having with Starlink. We see another dozen of these constellations looking to be launched over the next couple of years. This is the time when we all collectively can help shape these conversations, whether it's just in the public where we're talking and writing about it, whether it's on social media, whether it's in government aspects, whether it's in, you know, agencies and libraries. I mean, wherever we go, we have this opportunity to look at how do we get space-based internet right? How do we ensure it's open, that it's trustworthy, secure, that it does truly connect people that need it? How can we ensure that it's affordable and helps really connect the people who are unconnected in different ways? We have in our document, you can get it, it's internetsociety.org/LEOs. You can go there and you can see the documents there. We have some specific recommendations at the end. We have some things, and we also have a number of questions, and we need to be asking these as a society as we launch these. I think there's great potential that these systems, as they come online, can truly offer us ways to connect the unconnected and to get better connectivity for people who may even have some kind of connections, but they're looking for something better. So I think there's a tremendous amount of potential. The question is, will we get there? Will it bring about an open internet that really works in the way that we all want it to be? So I'd ask you again, please take a look at that. Take a look at these. Share it within your other organizations, within your other industries. We're at the Internet Society. I'm there specifically with a group of people looking at these kind of issues. Please feel free to reach out to me and connect us with your organization or people. We'd love to have these conversations and figure out how together, do we make the space-based internet and LEO-based internet really be a great way to bring the internet to everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Terrific job today, and great work on this report. It's such a valuable document to have to carry this conversation forward. We will be sending out invitations next week early next week for next Friday's session, where we'll have representatives from Starlink and Kuiper presenting their companies, their outlooks, their status, whatever they want to talk about, and ready to receive questions. So look for that in your mail. Thanks for staying late, those of you who did, and apologies for our late start today. We'll try to do better next week. And with that, we'll sign off. So thanks, everybody. See you next week.
And we should also clap for Dan.
Oh, sorry. Please, everybody, unmute real quick. Here, unmute.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Judith, and everybody. Yes, if we were in person, we would do that for you, Dan. And so
Yep.
here
Thank
we
you.
are. Great.
All righty.
I think stopped everything.